let's get into the fun stuff. Chris, tell us a little bit about the pay gem that you've got.
Yeah. Um, oh, the PayGem really started as like, I've implemented payments for Stripe and I don't know how many different apps, and I'd like improve it every single time, but then going back and kind of digging into some of the older versions that I did, I was like, you know what? I should like extract this out into something that I can just have as a library that is reusable, and then I can upgrade them all and keep them all consistent. Um, so then when we were working on Jumpstart, the first version of that, I was like, you know what? Let's not build payments in. Let's actually do that and like extract it and make it an open source project and whatever. And we can just use Jumpstart as like the version that's fully integrated already out of the box. But you can do whatever you want, with Pay directly, and it'll be available. And maybe people will fix bugs and whatnot for me, and we'll get to benefit from that too. So it's like where Pay started, and it was very naive in versions 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and probably still currently, naive in different ways. But over time, it's definitely evolved a lot from being very simple Rails engine to fairly complicated, but like supports a lot of things in as minimal way as possible. Or I don't want to build a library for an API that's going to change from underneath me and constantly have to deal with that, because then effectively then might as well go work for the company. So
Yeah.
that's been an interesting challenge of balancing all that stuff. But that's where we've gotten to in version. We just launched version 5, and it supports subscriptions, one-time billing or one-time checkout, Stripe checkout, PayPal, Paddle. We got a fake payment processor, Braintree, supports like kind of for the basic subscriptions and stuff, like all the same interface, but allows you to break out and do stuff that's unique for metered billing that Stripe does that Braintree doesn't do, or whatever, or Stripe tax that Braintree does not do. So it's been interesting to balance all of that, because I've never had that big of a project to ever do that's open source that tries to abstract 4 APIs or whatever. It's a lot.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Writing library code is totally different, and I've learned a lot doing that. So it's been interesting to learn all those things. Like, you imagine if you're a Rails developer and want to contribute to Rails, and imagine what Raphael's life is like as a baller, contributing to everything related to Rails. There's a lot of interesting decisions as a library maintainer that you have to consider. That's just backwards compatibility and other things like that. Where do we set the boundaries? Because everybody wants, your project to do everything. So how do you decide what goes into Pay or Rails, or what gets cut, and where do we draw the line? That's been an interesting thing I've learned a lot about. And then just in general, the sort of building something that is not going to break every release. And when I realized that I made a mistake in design, all these people depend on it, and there's database tables and things that they have done for using this library, that now I need to tell them, hey, we need to go move all that stuff and change it up. Those have been really hard and really interesting to learn. And I think it is maybe not something, well, you can definitely learn sort of the same things if you're building systems that talk with other systems a lot, especially if you're doing microservices, like keeping things in sync and whatnot is kind of a similar problem in a way.
Right.
I actually think an open source project that you place database tables within the user's database, that's like next level. Because like
It's
you can
hard.
do a little open source thing, but once you start fiddling with their data and you're storing it, and then like maybe they deprecate something, and it's like, okay, well, Postgres 17 in the future will now no longer have these things. It's like,
yes. So
next level.
literally last week, Colin and I were fiddling with one of those where not only do we have to work with your database, but we want this to be compatible with Postgres, MySQL, SQLite, ideally MariaDB and other SQL things. But the version of SQLite that currently ships with Ubuntu Jammy Jellyfish is 337. 338 introduced the arrow syntax for JSON columns and querying those. And like, that's not the same arrow for MySQL either. And Postgres does it slightly differently too. So we can't write a SQL query. We have to go check what database are you using and then do 3 different SQL queries for compatibility and everything. It's just, it's a pain. And yeah, one of the lessons I learned actually like drew inspiration from watching Rails do this with Action Mailbox and Active Storage and Action Text. Originally, Pay would go and say, hey, we are going to connect with Stripe and you are going to add these fields to whatever model you have, like your user model or your organization or whatever it might be that needs to collect billing. So we would go say, hey, add the processor ID in the processor, which might be Stripe or PayPal or Braintree or whatever. And then we'll keep track of their customer ID. And then also like their default card, which is, you know, the card last 4 and expiration month and year and the brand. And so we'd put these fields on your model, which sounded great at first and it was simple and that's what I was already doing. So I figured, why wouldn't the gem do that too? Until then people wanted to use it on multiple models. And then Pay ends up having to potentially, when a webhook comes in from Stripe, I have to now query multiple models and make N+1, you know, queries or whatever to find, well, is this for the user model or the organization model or whatever? And then these fields are also very limited in that, you know, Stripe and pretty much every payment processor allows multiple cards for same user, or actually just not cards, PayPal. You have an email address instead of, you know, last 4. And so I like cheated on some of these things and I shouldn't have. So I'd put like the PayPal email in the card last 4 field just for PayPal. And I was like, well, it does the job. It's just storage and whatever. It serves the same sort of purpose. But Rails with Active Storage and Action Mailbox and several of the other gems, those actually create models themselves that Rails controls. And you can extend them, but they actually get to decide. These are the fields. We're going to add a migration. We're going to change the fields. And, you know, the gem gets to control that, which was my mistake in the first versions of Pay. So we ended up in, I think, Pay version 3. We introduced Pay's models. So it ships with Pay customer and Pay, now Pay charge, Pay subscription, Pay payment method, yada, yada, yada. And that allows us just to, when we add it to your Rails app, it just says, hey, we'll add a belongs to on your user model and we'll have a polymorphic relationship so that we maintain our table. You can connect it any way you want, just like before. But also when a webhook comes in from Stripe, we just query Pay customer instead of N tables, however many you've plugged it into. So that was a really good one to learn that, like, yeah, if you're going to write a gem that has any database structure to it that's required, unless it's like soft delete where you actually want to put it on the user's models, then keep it to yourself, keep it private. In the gem, it's a lot easier to work with. That was a very hard learned lesson there.
Yeah.
It was very painful to convince people to upgrade and to like go through all the steps to migrate the data, because we had to go like create, when you go and make that upgrade, you've got downtime. You're going to have downtime, or you can backfill the data, and it's just like a pain. So we, do our best to kind of like give you the upgrade guide, but you're probably going to have to go modify this. If you want to have less downtime, then you're going to want to go and, change this. But the minimal migration example is there. And it's like, go through all your users and we'll go through and create the equivalent Pay customers. And then we can sync them from the API and backfill any new data, like the payment methods, we can like backfill all those and collect them all. So yeah, it is a very big challenge to do your own database stuff in a gem.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, database stuff in general is challenging, but having to deal with
It is.
everybody's database at once is a little bit of a trick.
If you like this clip and want to watch another one, you can click right here. Or if you want to watch the full video, you can click here.